So, und jetzt hatte ich vorhin angesprochen, wir haben unglaublich spannende Keynotes, die wir hören, die uns jetzt in das Symposium so ein bisschen reinziehen wollen. Ich sage es mal, Rahmenbedingungen vielleicht schaffen, Leitplanken schaffen. Und da freue ich mich sehr drauf. Den Anfang macht Professor Dr. Daniel Martin Feige, hier von der ABK, Professor für Philosophie und Ästhetik, Fachgruppe Design. Und Sie haben im Jahr 2015 ein Buch veröffentlicht, Computerspiele, eine Ästhetik. Ich habe da mal... Ich habe das gefunden online und habe dann gesehen, im Surkamp Verlag was, und dann standen da zwei Rezensionen drunter. Jetzt nicht ganz ausführlich, aber einmal von der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung von Natascha Adamowski. Sie hat geschrieben, Computerspiele werden als intellektuell mitreißende Gegenstände erkennbar. Das Buch Daniel Martin Feiges leistet zu dieser Einsicht einen überzeugenden Beitrag. Geht, glaube ich, ganz gut runter. So. Und ein weiteres von Hohe Luft. Ein spannender Beitrag zu einer Debatte, von der man in den nächsten Jahren sicher noch mehr erwarten könnte. Das wurde 2016 geschrieben, jetzt haben wir 2023. Jetzt ist also dieser Moment, wo man mehr erwarten kann, als hätten die damals auf unser Symposium gewartet. Heute eine Keynote mit dem Titel Videogames as Art and Ideology. So, richtig schön ausgesprochen. Und welcome, Professor Daniel Martin Feige. Schön, dass Sie da sind. Herzlich willkommen. Ja. Bitteschön.
Vielen Dank. Okay. As Faim asked me, I told him, okay, if I'm gonna give a talk, I have to be a bit of a party crasher here, because I'm coming from critical theory in Frankfurt, and I have a kind of differentiated look at games. I have to say I'm a passionate gamer. We talked about that in the beginning. Also a passionate board gamer. I know a lot of those board game prizes winners from the last years. And because I promised Faim that I will only be talking 20 minutes, it will be a bit dense, and I won't show any moving images from games. I will just show some screenshots from games. So let me start. I'm going to read this talk because I don't want to talk longer than Faim asked me to do. I will be talking about video games as art and ideology. In what follows, I want to give one central input to the debate for the following days, namely, video games are an essentially ambivalent medium regarding their aesthetic as well as emancipatory potentials. What do I mean with ambivalence here? I mean the following. While some video games might be discussed in terms of their arthood, many are somehow a problematic extension of our forms of work and leisure time. And while gamification can in specific cases be used in a reflexive and critical way, in some cases it carries on problematic grammars, and I don't have any dissent here with our organizers. To develop those ideas, I proceed in 4 very short steps. Is the sound okay actually? I have a kind of, is it good or okay? First I start with the question, what are video games anyway? Then I go on, putting some light on the idea that there could be an ideological dimension in video games. Then I would discuss 2 examples that could qualify as exemplifying what I would call the arthood of video games. And finally, and fourth, I conclude with just some very few sentences on gamification. So, what are video games anyway? What are we talking about when we talk about video games? I want to start with naming 4 criteria that could be part of a definition of video games I will say something about. In the end, what I don't think we need a strict definition, but I think those 4 are not bad candidates. First, video games are meant to be played, to be understood. Just like you have to look at a painting, to listen to a work of music, to read a novel, and to watch a movie, to proper judge it, you have to play the game in question. Even if there might be room, and this is why I put the 2 pictures here, there's the Nintendo again, even if there might be room for what Nathan Wildman and other colleagues called voyeur gaming, namely watching others play through stream or on the couch, it still presupposes knowledge of what games are, what it means to play the kind of game, etc. And some properties, for example, like the responsiveness of the controls, are not very much accessible if you don't play this stuff yourself. Second, video games are essentially an interactive medium. Whereas pressing the play button on a Blu-ray player or clicking on a clip on a Netflix page means the interactivity of a technical infrastructure that is affording for us to contemplate the aesthetic object in question, interactivity itself is built into video games as video games. This, however, doesn't mean that the act of playing is itself an object of aesthetic judgment, like, for example, the interpretation of a work by Beethoven. There we can say the musical interpretation is a work on its own right. I'm skeptical if we can say that a playthrough is a work on its own right. One further remark, one shouldn't mix up the notion of interactivity with the notion of a normative, substantial conception of freedom of the gamer. Of course, players have to do things in playing the game, but it depends on the game whether we can truly say that the playing exemplifies freedom in an interesting sense. Think of the difference between one of those interactive movie adventures like Phantasmagoria from the mid-90s, where you have a lot of video clips and you cannot do so many things, and then think of a game like Planescape Torment, a strongly narrative-driven game with a lot of freedom on the side of the player, which has different outcomes. How the way you play it, it ends differently, for example. Third, now I'm getting a bit more philosophical, video games paradigmatically embody rules. Rules could be a definitory condition of what it means to play a game in contrast to mere playing. Like we say, a kid is playing with a ball. We don't necessarily mean it is playing a game. It could just play with a ball. Without being able to go into much depth here, one can say that playing a game means to conform to what we in philosophy call constitutive rules. To give you an example, if you play chess and move the pawn like a knight, if you move the pawn, for example, like a queen, you're not playing chess anymore. You're playing it. You don't play it in a different way. You just stop playing chess because you so to say violate the rules that define the game in question. I have a citation from Bernard Suits here. He says games are the following: playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. This is not a bad definition. Whereas the kind of obstacles and the means to overcome them is part of the identity of the game you play. Scoring a point means something else in soccer and baseball, and you cannot win a marathon by taking the taxi. I hope you get the point I'm aiming at. So there is an intrinsic relation between the means and the goals of a game, and playing the game in question means to conform to these rules. Fourth, video games are based on digital technologies. This is the only board game example I have. What separates Dorfromantik on the left side as a video game from Dorfromantik as a board game on the right side? I think it was the board game winner, German board game winner, prize winner this year, is exactly this condition. This condition is not easy to specify because not every part of a modification of the digital medium it is nested in means to change the game in question. If you make the program code a bit more elegant, you don't necessarily have thereby created a new kind of game. There's a kind of difference there. In any case, however, it is an ontological essential feature that video games supervene and are nested in a digital medium. The kind of rules and the logic of interaction wouldn't be existing without the algorithmic foundation. But it is equally true that the constitutive features of a game are not reducible to a deeper level. In analogy, just like thoughts are not mere brain states, the logic of a game is not mere code. I end this first part with this small remark, a caveat. I aimed at an outline of what video games are without aiming at a strict definition. Why didn't I do this? Just as the films of Antonioni and Haneke do not simply fall under a given concept of film, but rather each redefines what film is and can be, aesthetically powerful video games each redefine and further define what their medium is. This is why I don't think a strict definition is helpful. It would conceal this kind of dynamic of the individual objects, how they reshape their own medium. I'm now coming to the second part. Now it gets a bit darker. Are video games a mere new aesthetic medium that enriches the given spectrum of established arts and media like literature, painting, movies, sculptures, maybe comics, performances, etc.? I think we should hesitate a bit. As a medium of the entertainment industry, it has less to do with the creation of autonomous objects and more to do with good business. With the classic analysis of Adorno and Horkheimer of the culture industry, one can say that supposedly self-sufficient products of the entertainment industry are not only an expression of a probably problematic social condition, but sometimes rather an extension of this condition. Let me elaborate this point in three a bit unrelated remarks. First, here are 4 different games I will mention. It is not only the controversies surrounding so-called loot boxes in games such as the upper left example, Star Wars Battlefront 2, which contain random game items for small amounts of real money and have rightly been discussed in the context of gambling, that shows that video games are above all one thing, something that can be used to make a lot of money. This mercantile logic explains the strong standardization in the field of video games. The game design associated, for example, with Assassin's Creed or Far Cry 3 has found its way into almost all of the publishers' subsequent productions, so that the phrase of the Ubisoft formula, Ubisoft is the publisher, has become a catchphrase. It is not experimentation with self-sufficient forms that drives large part of the development of video games, but it is the market. What sold well is adapted as a standard, or new standards are probably tried to establish. Even the early arcade games, you see the long time in Germany forbidden, Operation Wolf, I think it was forbidden, whose basic game structure was geared to getting players to put as much money in the machine as possible, gave rise to copies by other manufacturers that bordered on plagiarism. Of course, I have to say this loud and clear, even if it does not follow from this that video games are nothing else than business, anyone who does not take this dimension into account is overlooking one of their central properties. I think I'll skip this one. Just one remark about this. I don't think that independent games are necessarily this aesthetically superior genre of games compared to AAA games. This would be my only point here. Probably the most important thing for me is the following. The connection to economic and even power grammars of our society is not only present in the production of video games, but also in the usage they afford. To put it bluntly, one could say that many, at least not all, many video games are training for the job and leisure time. In most action as well as strategy games, the focus is on the efficient use of resources and on optimizing one's own play style. And in open world games and online role-playing games, game progress is achieved through monotonous activities. Playing Far Cry 6, for example, requires you to repeatedly complete various tasks in the gaming world, just as early role-playing games like Wizardry from 1981 confronted you with randomly appearing monsters that you had to repeatedly fight over and over just to stand a little chance against stronger monsters later on. It is no wonder, probably some of you know this, it is no wonder then that in online role-playing games such as World of Warcraft, players have paid other players for hours of collecting in-game resources or rare items with real money, and that complete accounts have been sold. These are forms of sublimated labor, and real money sometimes is the reward. Don't be afraid, I'm going to sound a lot more positive in a few seconds. I have to skip this part, I think. Just one remark. In view of these short remarks, we should be skeptical to the idea that playing video games can be explained from within the tradition coming from Schiller, going to Gadamer and beyond, on the aesthetic concept of play without taking its immanent dialectic into account. What may be a self-sufficient event from the perspective of the gamer and appears to be decoupled from any social and political conditions may in fact indeed fulfill social and conditions, functions, and have political aspects. So, and now I change the tone. I will ask, could they nevertheless be art? It seems to me important to start with the following remark. There is more than one way of something being a video game. With regard to different genres of the medium as well as different historical stages, it allows for such different games like you probably all know the first Tetris from the first Game Boy, like the really terrific Baldur's Gate 3 from this year, or the first Halo. Just as there is more than one way of being a video game, there are not only games that merely are products of culture industry and ideological grammars, but some that are as games reflections of these grammars. Here we touch upon the topic of arthood. One more difficult thought, and then I'm coming back to two games I will describe a bit more. Before briefly mentioning at least two of such games, let me elaborate on this idea of the arthood of video games at least a bit. And this is what I developed in my book, basically. In line with the aesthetic tradition coming from Kant and Hegel, and not ending but going through Adorno and Arthur Dento, I propose to understand the arthood of an artifact in terms of its specific capacity to allow for a special form of self-thematization, be it a beholder of a painting, a watcher of a movie, or a player of a game. The arthood of video games stems from their reflexive character in terms of that a video game, in being art, not only relates itself to its own mediality, but in doing so forces the players into a practical reflection of their own agencies. Something qualifies to be an artwork in the realm of video games if the form of playing it allows for is at once a reflection of its own gamehood, so to say, and a reflection of the role of the player. And I mean it this way, those are not two distinct things, but two sides of one and the same coin. And now let me look at two examples. Who knows BioShock? Hands up. Okay, not as many as I thought. One of the most discussed examples in philosophy has been 2007's BioShock. The game is standing in the tradition of nowadays so-called immersive sims. It combines elements of exploration, environmental narration with shooter role-playing mechanics. The game takes place in an underwater city called Rapture that has been built by the billionaire Andrew Ryan as a social utopia. His name doesn't resemble the libertarian Ayn Rand by accident. The dismantling of any normative restrictions on scientific research has led to the city's residents increasingly destroying themselves through attempts of genetic self-optimization and the social forms to disintegrate. All this is presented in an intriguing retro-futuristic look in Art Deco style. You can at least have an impression from the left picture probably. The game has been advertised with its philosophical significance because it is meant to force the player into deep moral decisions. Let me just remark, this is a hoax. If discussed in an art context, there's another aspect of this game that is much more interesting and convincing. The game itself offers an immanent critique of gamification and at least points to the idea that the structures of itself as a game is not so different from what it shows in its dystopian libertarian setting. You get an idea what I mean, hopefully. Let me elaborate how it does that. Once getting to the city Rapture by a plane accident, the player is contacted by someone named Atlas in the fictional world. Atlas is guiding him through the game, and part of this guidance is the tutorial where the player gets to know the controls and how to interact with the game world. Whenever he has to do something, this is introduced by the phrase, "Would you kindly?" All players of this game who finish it knows what's this about. As the game progresses, however, the player not only finds out that this contact is rather unreliable and someone else, and even finds out that he himself has been in Rapture before, I skip this, but also that he has been trained to follow commands that are introduced with this phrase. At the narrative climax of this game, the player loses control and can only watch his alter ego kill Andrew Ryan because the mentioned phrase has been used. I want to propose that this twist is more than a narrative twist because it plays with the double role of the player being the protagonist and being the player. It shows the standardization, habitualization in gaming structures itself. I hope you get basically the idea of what I'm talking about here, even if you don't know the game. Open, however, stays to my mind the question whether this game ultimately succeeds with this step. It ends up employing the same devices as the ones it started with in terms of the player's agency. To put it short and bluntly, he just goes on shooting everything in sight. As a second example, does anybody know Kentucky Route Zero? Everybody should know this game. I want to mention Kentucky Route Zero, which has been released in episodes between 2013 and 2020, and at first looks like a classical point-and-click adventures for the gamers, of course, who know it, like the Lucasfilm games, the early ones, or something of the likes. But not only, it isn't about winning or losing, it also has no puzzles in a classical sense. It starts with its protagonist travels to rural America, depopulated by industrialization and capitalism. The setting not only becomes more and more fantastic and surreal, but after some times there's rather a choir of protagonists. You're not alone, but there is a whole gang, so to say, of protagonists. And the game then starts more to consist in deciding who says something and not what one is saying. The game ends with a polyphonic reflection on aspects of the current state of America in light of the recent political disruptions. Among the most interesting aspects, however, of Kentucky Route Zero is that it is not only a game, even if the game is the most important part of it. The different episodes of the games are interrupted by interplays that employ different kinds of media and ways of distribution, other than that of mere gaming. Kentucky Route Zero is a game released in episodes, is a temporary exhibition in an off-space in Berlin, which can be walked through virtually in an interlude, is a music video, is a theatrical script that you can buy on the internet and whose virtual performance you can witness in interplay, and is a telephone line that was actually switched on at a certain period of time. To pick up a phrase by the colleague Peter Osborne, art theoretician, the unity of this game is malleable and it has unclear borders. And this is a signum, so to say, of current works of art in general, I'd say. I end up with just 2 sentences. Sorry. If what I've developed is correct, gamification is not an innocent and neutral tool for conveying content or opening up participatory paths for different users. Rather, it is a form that carries with it the logic critically addressed in the second part. However, this does not mean that every form of gamification is ideological. Rather, it means using it in such a way that it is able to question itself at the same time can actually be one of the contemporary ways of making something accessible in a world strongly informed by digital technologies. An emancipatory use of gamification, however, would be a use that simultaneously focuses on and highlights what cannot be accessed merely by gamification. Thank you very much for your attention.